My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 29 years old. And the strange thing about the moment your life splits open in public is that it does not always sound dramatic when it begins. Sometimes there is no shouting, no breaking glass, no cinematic collapse, so obvious that everyone in the room turns their heads at once and knows something permanent has just ended. Sometimes it happens in a whisper. Sometimes it happens while a pastor is praying over a casket. Sometimes the person beside you leans close enough for you to feel his breath against your cheek and says something so small, so selfish, so casually cruel that your whole body understands the truth before your mind is willing to touch it. Last Tuesday, I buried the only real father figure I ever had. My grandfather raised me from the time I was 6 years old. Not because he had planned to, not because life had been gentle enough to give him a peaceful retirement with crossword puzzles and tomatoes in the yard. He raised me because life cracked open early, and he stepped into the broken place without complaint. He taught me how to tie a tie before my high school debate tournaments because he said, "A woman should know how to do for herself anything the world assumes she'll wait for a man to handle." He taught me how to change a tire in a grocery store parking lot in August heat while sweat ran down both our backs and I cried because I thought I was doing it wrong. He taught me how to shake someone's hand properly, how to look people in the eye, how to keep my word even when it cost me something. He was the kind of man who never asked for respect. He made people want to give it. When he died, it felt like the floor beneath my life gave way all at once. I had been dating my boyfriend Ethan for about 8 months. And if I'm honest, the warning signs were always there. He was handsome in this polished, curated way that photographs well. He cared about lighting, angles, appearances, the right table at the right restaurant, who had seen his stories and who had not. He was always just a little too invested in being admired, a little too restless when the room's attention drifted somewhere that was not him. But when you are inside something, you make excuses. You tell yourself he is just outgoing. You tell yourself he is uncomfortable with heavy emotions. You tell yourself that everyone handles grief differently, boredom differently, silence differently. You tell yourself anything that lets you postpone the humiliation of admitting you chose wrong. The funeral was held in a small chapel that felt 2 sizes too small for that much sorrow. It was hot in a stale, oppressive way, the kind of heat old buildings hold in the wood. Every pew was filled. My grandfather had touched more lives than I think I even knew. Men he had worked with decades ago came. Women from church came. Neighbors. Former students from the vocational classes he used to volunteer with. My aunt said afterward that the room looked like proof of a life well lived. At the time, all I could think was that there were too many people and not enough air. I was sitting in the front pew, staring at the grain of the casket, because if I looked too directly at it, I was afraid I would stop breathing. I had to get up and speak in 10 minutes. I had written the eulogy myself and revised it 4 times, trying to find words large enough for a man who had shaped my whole moral vocabulary. Ethan sat beside me. For the last 20 minutes, he had been shifting constantly, crossing and uncrossing his legs, sighing through his nose, adjusting his jacket, rolling his shoulders like the act of sitting still in grief was an unreasonable physical burden. The wood creaked every time he moved. I ignored him. I was trying to remember my opening line. The pastor had just started the prayer when I felt a sharp tap against my thigh. At first, I thought maybe it was accidental, a twitch, a nervous movement. Then it happened again, more insistently. I turned my head. Ethan was leaning toward me, his face arranged in that impatient expression people wear in line at a coffee shop when the person ahead of them is ordering too slowly. His cologne, clean and expensive and completely wrong for that room, cut across the scent of lilies and old wood polish. He lifted his phone slightly so I could see the screen. The brightness was turned all the way up. Even now, I remember that stupid rectangle of white light slicing through the dim chapel like a disrespectful little spotlight. And then he whispered, not nearly softly enough, "Can we leave? This is so boring, and I have brunch plans at 1 with Marissa." Marissa, his ex-girlfriend. He had insisted they were friends now, mature friends, evolved adults. Nothing weird, nothing messy, nothing disrespectful. I had never liked how casually he folded her into our relationship like I was supposed to be impressed by his modern emotional landscape. But that was not even the part that landed first. The first thing that landed was boring. My grandfather's funeral was boring. His death was an inconvenience. My grief was dead air. This room full of love and memory and heartbreak was just an obstacle between Ethan and the Eggs Benedict. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the smooth line of his jaw, at the flawless hair he had spent too long styling that morning, at the bored vacancy in his eyes. at the thumb already tapping lightly against his phone screen, waiting for me to answer, so he could return to the more pressing matter of his brunch reservation. And what chilled me was this. He was not trying to be cruel. Cruelty would have required awareness. This was worse. This was indifference so complete it had hollowed out the part of him where reverence should live. Something inside me did not explode. It went quiet. That is the best way I know to describe it. Not rage, not tears, not the sharp, dramatic stab people write songs about. It was more like hearing a breaker trip somewhere deep in the walls of a house. A single internal click. And then darkness where connection used to be. I turned my body slightly toward him. I did not whisper. I said in a normal, flat voice, "You should go." He blinked at me like he had not heard correctly. "What?" "I'm staying," I said. "You should go now." For a second, he just stared. Then his face changed. Not into shame, not into concern, but into offense. "Seriously?" he hissed. "You're not coming?" "No. We could just take your car and—" "No, Ethan." My voice stayed perfectly calm. That seemed to bother him more than if I had cried. "You should go." He let out the smallest incredulous huff, like I was being difficult in public on purpose. Then he snatched up his phone, grabbed his sunglasses from beside him, and rose from the pew with exaggerated annoyance. He squeezed past me hard enough that his hip knocked my knee. I moved my legs in automatically, not because I wanted to make it easier for him, but because I was too emotionally exhausted to create a scene. He did not look back. He walked straight down the center aisle, while the pastor was still speaking, his shoes striking the chapel floor in crisp little clicks that seemed obscenely loud in the hush of morning. I saw my aunt glance over from across the aisle. I saw my cousin close her eyes for half a second in disbelief. Ethan pushed through the heavy oak doors with one hand while looking back down at his phone with the other. And then he was gone. The room settled. Or maybe I did. I do not remember deciding to stand. I only remember the strange steadiness that came over me as I rose when the pastor said my name. I walked to the podium. I unfolded the pages I had written, and I gave the eulogy. I did not stutter. I did not break. I did not even cry until later. I spoke about my grandfather's hands, broad, rough, permanently marked by work. I spoke about the way he never let pain turn him mean. I spoke about loyalty, which he considered less a virtue than a basic requirement of character. I spoke about how some people shape your life not by grand speeches, but by the quiet consistency of showing up again and again and again. I said that love, at its core, is presence. I said that some people teach you how to live simply by the way they stay. And while I was speaking, I understood with brutal clarity that the man who had just left the chapel had taught me something too. Not by staying, by leaving. Afterward, people hugged me. My aunt cried into my shoulder. An old friend of my grandfather's pressed my hand and told me he would have been proud of me. Someone asked where Ethan had gone, and I said, he had to leave, in the same tone a person might use to describe bad weather. I did not call him. I did not text him. I went home alone, still wearing my black dress and my funeral heels. I kicked them off by the couch, poured one glass of the cheap scotch my grandfather used to keep on the top kitchen shelf, and sat in the quiet of my apartment with the lights off. The grief came in waves then. Not pretty tears, not cinematic trembling, just exhaustion so deep it felt cellular. I stared at the wall. At some point, I fell asleep on the couch, still wearing my dress, one earring missing, mascara dried stiff at the corners of my eyes. When I woke up the next morning, I checked my phone out of instinct. Nothing from Ethan. That should have surprised me. It didn't. Thursday passed, then Friday morning. Still nothing. Later, I found out through a mutual acquaintance that Ethan had expected me to apologize. Apparently, in his version of events, I had embarrassed him by telling him to leave alone. I had been cold, distant, dramatic. He had shown up for me, and I had punished him for not mourning correctly. He was waiting for me to reach out, waiting for me to smooth over his discomfort while I planned my grandfather's burial. That was the part that finally killed even the smallest surviving impulse to explain myself. 3 days later, Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed. His name on the screen. Just one text. Are we good? Not how are you, not I'm sorry, not I handled that badly, not even a lazy little sorry about your grandfather. Just a temperature check, a maintenance ping, a bored inquiry to see if I had finished being inconveniently sad, yet so regular programming could resume. I stared at the message for a long time, and the strangest part was that I did not feel anger. I felt nothing. Nothing is colder than the moment somebody realizes they have used up the last drop of your care, and there is simply no more left to draw from. I opened the message, Typed a single period. Sent it. Then I blocked his number. Then I blocked him on Instagram. Blocked him on Snapchat. Blocked him everywhere I could think of with a speed that felt almost holy. It took him about 2 hours to realize what I had done. That evening, I was sitting at my kitchen counter eating takeout noodles straight from the carton, finally beginning to feel like a person wearing skin again, when my phone started vibrating across the table. Unknown number. I let it ring. Voicemail. Then another call, another voicemail, then a third, then a fourth. I listened because grief makes you reckless, and part of me wanted to know whether there was even 1 ounce of self-awareness hiding somewhere under all that vanity. There wasn't. The first voicemail was sharp and indignant. Are you serious right now? You're blocking me because I wanted to leave early? Claire, you're being so dramatic. Call me back. We have plans next weekend, and we need to figure out what's going on. The second turned self-righteous. Okay, this is actually concerning. Silent treatment is emotionally abusive. My mom said you're probably just grieving, but you can't take that out on me. The third was angrier. I sat in that church for an hour for you. I supported you, and you threw me out like I was nothing. Grow up and call me back. I deleted all of them. Then I took another bite of noodles that had gone lukewarm while he talked. And I understood, maybe for the first time without denial softening the edges, that I was not just grieving my grandfather. I was grieving the woman I had been inside that relationship. The woman who kept translating selfishness into stress, who kept mistaking charm for depth, who kept giving understanding to someone who never once deserved it. Ethan thought we were having a fight. He thought this was a rough patch, a lover's spat, a temporary freeze. He did not understand that when I told him you should go, I had not meant for the afternoon. I had meant forever. 5 days later, the silence ended. Of course it did. Men like Ethan don't accept silence as an answer. They treat it like a glitch, something temporary, something that will correct itself once you calm down and come back to your senses. The weekend after the funeral passed quietly. I spent most of it in my grandfather's house, packing things into boxes that felt heavier than their actual weight. Old tools, folded shirts that still carried the faint scent of his aftershave, a drawer full of rubber bands and receipts he never threw away. The kind of ordinary objects that become unbearable the moment the person attached to them is gone. Strangely, I felt steadier than I expected. Not better, just clearer. And the absence of Ethan, now firmly my ex, made the grief easier to hold. I didn't have to explain my sadness. I didn't have to perform it at the right volume so it didn't inconvenience anyone else. I didn't have to rush through it so someone could get back to brunch plans and filtered photos. It was just mine, unedited, unshared, uninterrupted. By Monday evening, I was back in my apartment. The light outside had that soft, fading gold of early evening, and I was standing in my kitchen rinsing a coffee mug when I heard it. A knock. Not a normal knock. A heavy, sharp, insistent pounding that echoed through the hallway like someone trying to make a point. My first thought, irrational and immediate, was the police. The kind of knock you hear in movies before something changes. I dried my hands slowly, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. It wasn't the police. It was Ethan. And he hadn't come alone. Standing half a step behind him was Marissa, his ex-girlfriend. The brunch date. Her arms were crossed, her expression tight and self-righteous, like she had already decided I was the villain before I even opened the door. I didn't open it. Instead, I tapped the screen of the doorbell camera, something my grandfather had insisted on installing for me a year ago. He used to say, "Trust people if you want. Just make sure you can see them coming." The video feed flickered on. Ethan pounded again. "Claire, I know you're in there," he shouted. "Open the door." I pressed the intercom button. "Go away." The effect was immediate. Both of them startled slightly, eyes darting up to the camera lens, like they had forgotten they were being watched. Ethan stepped closer, jaw tightening. "No," he snapped. "Open the door. You don't get to just disappear like this and steal my stuff." My grip tightened slightly around the edge of the counter beside me. "Your stuff?" I repeated, my voice calm, even to my own ears. "You don't have anything here." Marissa leaned forward just enough to make sure her voice carried. "That's not true," she cut in. "You're being petty. Just give him his things and stop acting like this is some dramatic breakup." I let a small breath out through my nose. It was almost impressive how quickly they had constructed a version of reality that made them both feel justified. "I packed everything he left here," I said. "It's by the door." "Then open it," Ethan demanded. "We need to talk." "No," I said simply. There was a pause. Then his tone shifted, less commanding, more coaxing, like I was a stubborn child he needed to manage. "Claire, come on," he said. "This is getting ridiculous. You blocked me everywhere. I've been trying to reach you. We need closure." Closure. That word again. as if closure was something you negotiated together over coffee after one person had revealed exactly who they were at a funeral. "I have closure," I said. Silence on the other side. Then I added evenly, "You left the service. That was the closure." Marissa scoffed loudly. "Oh my God," she muttered. "It was a funeral, not a wedding. He didn't ruin your life." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Claire, you're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "I was uncomfortable. It was intense. I needed air. That doesn't mean you get to cut me off like I did something horrible." I didn't respond to that, because explaining basic empathy to someone who lacks it is like explaining color to someone who refuses to open their eyes. Instead, I walked to the closet by the front door. The grocery bag was still there. I had packed it the same night I blocked him. A faded university hoodie he had left draped over the back of a chair. A small toiletry bag with face wash and moisturizer he kept in my bathroom like he lived there, which he didn't. A generic phone charger tangled into itself. I picked up the bag, walked back to the door, unlocked the top lock but left the chain in place. When I cracked the door open a few inches, Ethan immediately pushed forward, trying to force it wider. "Let me in," he said sharply. "We need to—" I shoved the bag through the gap before he could finish. It hit him square in the chest. "There," I said, "that's everything." He looked down at it like it had personally insulted him. "This is it?" he demanded. "What about the ticket?" "Of course, the ticket." Marissa stepped in again, her voice sharper now. "And his money," she added. "Don't forget that part." I felt something inside me settle even further. "Ah, so that was why they were really here." "Ethan," I said, my voice still level, "you didn't pay me for the ticket." "I was going to," he snapped. "You blocked me before I could." "You had 3 weeks before that," I replied. "That's not the point," he shot back. "We had an agreement." "Yes," I said, "you'd pay me." Marissa let out an incredulous laugh. "This is insane," she said. "You're really going to keep his ticket over something this petty? After everything he's been dealing with?" I blinked slowly. "What has he been dealing with?" I asked. Neither of them answered that, because there was no answer that didn't sound ridiculous out loud. Ethan's jaw clenched. "You're being a psycho," he said finally. "You know that, right? My girlfriend's grandfather dies, and suddenly I'm the bad guy because I didn't sit there pretending to cry all day." The words hung there. Heavy. Ugly. Final. Something in my chest tightened, not with doubt, not with regret, but with confirmation. I had not misread that moment in the chapel. Not even a little. I pushed the door closed, locked the deadbolt. Through the wood, I heard him swear. Then louder, angrier. "I'm calling the cops. You can't just steal from me." I leaned my forehead briefly against the door, closed my eyes, counted to 5. Then I walked back to my couch and sat down. If he wanted to escalate this into something official, I would meet him there. 20 minutes later, there was another knock. This one was calmer, measured. I opened the door. 2 police officers stood there, one older, one younger. Both looked like they had already had a long day. Behind them, Ethan and Marissa stood side by side. Ethan had arranged his face into something almost convincing. Eyes slightly red, posture tense, the picture of a wronged man trying to stay composed. "Ma'am," the older officer said, "we got a report of stolen property and refusal to return personal belongings." "I returned his belongings," I said, "about 20 minutes ago." The officer glanced back at Ethan. "He kept my festival ticket," Ethan said immediately. "It's worth $400. She's holding it hostage." I resisted the urge to laugh. "Sir," I said to the officer, "I purchased both tickets on my credit card. They're in my name." He agreed to pay me back for his and never did. "I was going to pay her," Ethan cut in quickly. "That was the agreement." "Did you?" the officer asked, turning to him. Ethan hesitated. "Not yet," he admitted, "because she blocked me." The officer blinked slowly. "So, you haven't paid for the item you're claiming is yours?" "It was a gift," Ethan said, pivoting instantly. "She bought them for us. You can't take back a gift." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "I have the text messages," I said. The officer nodded. I showed him the thread. "Ethan, babe, please buy them before they sell out. I'll Venmo you Friday, promise." Me, done. $860 total. I watched the officer read it, watched his expression flatten into quiet understanding. "She agreed to pay," I said. "She didn't." He handed my phone back to me, then turned to Ethan. "Sir, this is a civil matter," he said. "If you want to pursue reimbursement, you'll have to take it to small claims court. We can't force her to give you something she paid for." Ethan's composure cracked. "But she's stealing from me," he snapped. "And," I added calmly, "I've asked him to leave my property multiple times. He doesn't live here." The officer nodded again. "You heard her," he said to Ethan. "Time to go. Don't come back or we'll be having a different conversation." The look on Ethan's face, it wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't regret. It was shock. Pure, unfiltered shock that the world had not rearranged itself to accommodate him. Marissa muttered something under her breath, but she stepped back. Ethan stared at me like I had personally betrayed him. "You're unbelievable," he said. Then louder, as they turned to leave, "You're going to regret this." I didn't answer. I closed the door, locked it, and stood there for a long moment, listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway, his voice rising again as they reached the stairwell, angry, loud, accusing the universe of unfairness. When the building finally went quiet again, I walked to my laptop, logged into the ticket site, and listed both VIP passes for resale. They sold within the hour. I made $50. I stared at the confirmation email for a second. Then I opened another tab and donated the entire amount, tickets and profit, to the hospice center that had taken care of my grandfather in his final weeks. It wasn't about the money. It was about refusing to let something ugly stay ugly. I closed the laptop, exhaled, and for a brief moment, I thought that was the end of it. I underestimated how far someone will go to avoid admitting they were wrong. The next morning, I woke up to an email. Not from Ethan, from his mother. The subject line read, "Disappointed." I didn't open it. Not yet, but I could see the first line in the preview. "I never thought you were the kind of woman to abandon a man in his time of need." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I set my phone face down on the table, because if this was how they were going to play it, if they were going to rewrite reality this boldly, then this wasn't over. Not even close. I waited 2 days before opening the email, not because I was afraid of what it would say, because I already knew. People like Ethan don't invent narratives on their own. They inherit them. They are raised inside them, protected by them, reinforced by people who would rather distort reality than admit they raised someone incapable of basic empathy. When I finally opened the message, it was exactly what I expected. Long, polished, carefully worded in a tone that tried to sound concerned while quietly rearranging the truth into something more convenient. According to his mother, Ethan hadn't been bored at the funeral. He had been overwhelmed. The atmosphere had been too heavy, the grief too intense, and his comment about brunch had simply been a coping mechanism, a way to ground himself, a harmless attempt to bring himself back to something normal. I actually paused reading at that point, because there are moments when the lie is so absurd it almost becomes impressive. Grounding himself, with bottomless mimosas. I kept reading. The email went on to explain that Ethan had been deeply hurt by my reaction, that he had shown up for me during one of the hardest days of my life, and that I had responded by humiliating him, shutting him out, and now, apparently, financially exploiting him over a trivial disagreement. It ended with a list of demands. Apologize. Unblock him. Make things right financially. And, my personal favorite, a note that Ethan had been so emotionally distressed by the situation that he hadn't been able to work properly all week. I sat there rereading that last line. Ethan worked part-time at a boutique fitness studio. The economy, I'm sure, was trembling. I closed the email, didn't reply, dragged it into a folder I created specifically for this situation. I named it Trash Fire. And for a brief, naive moment, I thought ignoring it would be enough. It wasn't, because silence only works on people who have the capacity for reflection. Ethan didn't. And within days, the situation shifted from private absurdity to public performance. I didn't see it myself at first. I had him blocked everywhere. But the few mutual friends I still trusted, the ones who didn't immediately default to neutrality just to avoid discomfort, started sending me screenshots. "Hey," one of them texted, "I think you should see this." The first screenshot was from Instagram. Ethan, crying, or at least posing like he was crying. The lighting was soft, filtered, his face angled just enough to catch the shine in his eyes. The caption read, "Sometimes the person you stand by in their darkest moments turns around and punishes you the second you show weakness. Scared, alone, but surviving. Hashtag narcissist survivor. Hashtag toxic relationships." I stared at it for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it was so predictable. There was no mention of the funeral, no mention of what he had said, just vague, emotionally loaded language designed to invite speculation and sympathy. And at first, it worked. A couple of messages trickled into my inbox. People I barely knew. People who had never once asked me how I was doing after losing my grandfather. "Hey, I don't know what's going on, but you should really talk to him. This doesn't seem like you. I hope you're not actually treating him like that." I didn't respond. Because defending yourself against a half-told story is like trying to mop up water while the pipe is still bursting. Then he escalated. The next set of screenshots came in faster. More aggressive. This time he wasn't being vague anymore. He started telling people I owed him money. Thousands of dollars. He claimed he had helped cover funeral expenses, that he had stepped up financially when I couldn't, that I had taken the money and cut him off. That's when I stopped ignoring it. Because grief is one thing, reputation is another. I work in a field where background checks matter, where accusations, even false ones, have consequences that don't disappear just because you know the truth. And this wasn't just messy, it was defamatory. So I did something I had avoided up until that point. I responded. Not to him, not directly, just publicly. Once, carefully. I chose my words the way my grandfather taught me to choose them when it mattered. I posted a photo of the funeral program. Simple, unedited. Then I added a redacted bank statement showing the total cost billed by the funeral home. $0. Prepaid. 20 years ago. The caption was short, deliberate. Grieving is hard enough without lies. My grandfather paid for his own funeral decades ago. No one loaned me money. No one supported me financially. And if you left the service before the eulogy to go to brunch, please stop rewriting the story. I didn't tag him, didn't name him, didn't need to. Truth has a way of finding the people it belongs to. The reaction was immediate, not explosive, not dramatic, just quiet. The messages stopped. The people who had been questioning me suddenly went silent. A few close friends liked the post. Others said nothing, but I could feel the shift. Because his story had never been strong. It had just been loud. And once there was proof, simple, verifiable proof, it collapsed under its own weight. For most people, that would have been the end. For Ethan, it was just the beginning of a new kind of escalation. 2 days later, I came home from work and found something taped to my door. A single sheet of lined notebook paper. Folded once, my name written across the front in thick, uneven letters. I stood there in the hallway for a second, keys still in my hand. Then I pulled it down and unfolded it. It was an invoice, handwritten, itemized. I read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding what I was looking at. Consulting fee. Emotional support. During your grieving. $500. Personal styling. Helping you choose outfits. $200. Time spent visiting hospital. Last month. $600. Festival tickets. Stolen. $800. Total owed $2,100. I stood there in the hallway, staring at that piece of paper. There's a certain kind of anger that burns hot. This wasn't that. This was something colder. He had charged me for visiting my dying grandfather. He had turned sitting beside me in a hospital room into a billable service. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I took a picture of it. Carefully. Clearly. Documentation. Always documentation. Then I walked downstairs to the leasing office. My landlord, a perpetually irritated man in his late 60s who seemed personally offended by the existence of noise, looked up when I walked in. "What's going on?" he asked. I set my phone on the desk and pulled up the footage from the doorbell camera. Ethan pounding on my door. Marissa behind him. The police arriving. Then I showed him the photo of the invoice. "I'm being harassed," I said simply. "He doesn't live here. He's not on the lease. I want him trespassed if he shows up again." The landlord leaned back in his chair, squinting at the screen. Then he snorted. "She charging you for hospital visits, hey?" he muttered. "Yeah," I said. He shook his head. "That's low." "I know." He tapped the desk once with his finger. "I'll notify security," he said. "If his car comes through the gate, we tow it." "Thank you." I left the office feeling something I hadn't felt in days. Not relief. Not exactly. More like containment. Like the situation was no longer spilling outward unchecked. Like there were edges now. Boundaries. But deep down, I already knew something else. People like Ethan don't stop when they're wrong. They escalate. They push. They rewrite. They demand until they hit something that doesn't move. And I had just decided, finally, to become that wall. The wall didn't come from anger. It came from exhaustion. The kind that settles deep in your bones after you realize you've been negotiating with someone who doesn't recognize reality as a shared space. That's when I called my lawyer friend. Her name is Julia. We met in college, back when my life was still simple enough to measure in semesters and not in losses. She listened to everything without interrupting. Ethan, the funeral, the police, the posts, the invoice. When I finished, there was a brief pause. Then she said, "Yeah, we're done being patient." I paid her $300. Not for a lawsuit, for a line in the sand. A cease and desist letter. Formal, direct, precise. It outlined everything. His false claims about funeral money, the harassment, the attempt to damage my reputation. It stated clearly that any further contact, direct or indirect, would result in legal action. Defamation, restraining order. The words were dry, controlled, and heavy in a way no argument ever is. We sent it certified mail to his mother's house, because that's where he was staying now. I got the delivery notification the next morning. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Of course I did. I've learned by now that silence is the only language people like Ethan actually hear. The transcription came through a few seconds later. I read it instead of listening. You are ruining my life. My mom is freaking out. You got lawyers involved over a breakup? You're sick. I just wanted what I was owed. And then, the line that sat with me longer than the rest. You're supposed to be the woman. You're supposed to take care of things. I stared at that sentence. Read it twice. Because sometimes people reveal everything in one careless moment. That was it. That was the entire foundation of how he saw me. Not as a partner. Not as a person. As a role. As a function. Someone who absorbs discomfort, smooths over conflict, manages emotions, and makes sure things never get inconvenient for him. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because for the first time since this all started, he sounded afraid. And not of me. Of consequences. The silence that followed was different. He didn't call again. No more unknown numbers. No more voicemails layered with accusation and entitlement. Nothing. A week passed. Then 2. Then 3. And just like that, it was over. Not dramatically. Not with closure. Just absence. Julia later told me the letter likely scared his mother more than it scared him. Not because she suddenly understood right and wrong, but because a defamation case would mean everything gets exposed. Screenshots, messages, timelines. People who care about appearances fear evidence. I imagine that conversation in their house was loud. I imagine it ended with her telling him to stop. And for once, he listened. The fallout, though, lingered. It always does. I lost about half the people in our shared social circle, not because they openly sided with him. That would have been easier to respect. They just drifted, stopped replying, stopped inviting, chose distance over discomfort, neutrality over truth. At first, I tried to understand it. Then I stopped. Because if someone can look at a situation where a man leaves a funeral for brunch and decide it's too complicated to form an opinion, I don't need them in my life. There was one last attempt. A final desperate swing. Marissa. Of course it was her. She sent an anonymous email to my company's HR department, claimed I was unstable, that I had violent tendencies, that I had stolen money from a man during a vulnerable time. It was sloppy, emotional, full of just enough detail to sound convincing to someone who didn't know me. But here's the thing about living honestly. You don't have to scramble when someone lies about you. My boss called me into his office, closed the door, held up a printed copy of the email. Anything I should know? He asked. I told him everything, calmly. Start to finish. Showed him the police report, the messages, the cease and desist. He read through it all without interrupting. Then he leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet laugh. Breakups are hell, he said. I smiled faintly. Yeah. He tapped the paper once. Don't worry about this, he added. Keep your head down. You're good. That was it. No investigation. No suspicion. Just trust. Marissa's last move collapsed the same way Ethan's lies had. Too loud. Too messy. Too easy to disprove. A few days later, one of the only mutual friends I still talk to sent me a screenshot. Ethan. At a winery. Arm around a new girl. She looked younger, bright-eyed, leaning into him like she believed everything he said. The caption read, "Finally found someone who knows how to treat me right. No drama, just love. #upgrade. I stared at it for a second. Not with jealousy, not with anger, with something closer to recognition. That girl, she's where I used to be. At the beginning. Before the cracks show. Before the small things start to feel off. Before the moment that splits everything open. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But everyone learns in their own time. Or they don't. A month passed, and then another. The silence held. No texts. No emails. No notes taped to my door. No more attempts to pull me back into something I had already left. My apartment feels different now. Quieter. Not empty. Just peaceful. I still have my grandfather's urn on the mantel. I haven't decided where to scatter his ashes yet. Somewhere meaningful. Somewhere steady. Somewhere that doesn't pretend to be more than it is. The donation receipt from the hospice center sits in a box beside his medals. I kept it there on purpose. Not as proof. As a reminder. That even the ugliest moments can be redirected into something that still holds dignity. The most satisfying part of all of this isn't that I won. I didn't. I lost a relationship. I lost people I thought were friends. I had to deal with police officers and legal letters while I was still trying to process grief that hadn't even settled yet. That's not winning. The satisfaction comes from something quieter, something smaller, Something that doesn't need an audience. This morning I made coffee, stood on my balcony, watched the city wake up without rushing it. I didn't have to check if the noise would bother anyone. Didn't have to adjust the temperature. Didn't have to ask what someone else needed before I decided what I wanted. I just existed. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I thought about my grandfather, about the way he would have looked at Ethan. Polite, measured, but already knowing. He wouldn't have said anything. He never did. But I think he would have been proud of one thing. Not the silence, not the legal letter, not the fact that I didn't chase, didn't argue, didn't try to fix what wasn't mine to fix. Just that one sentence, the one that ended everything. You should go. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even loud. It was just honest. And sometimes, honesty is the cleanest ending you're ever going to get.